One of the biggest challenges that many families face after divorce is, and even during the divorce, is how to continue co-parenting if you're dealing with as Bill Eddy calls them, a high conflict or a toxic person. It's not as easy as it sounds, and a lot of the basic rules for co-parenting are not going to apply, or they're going to be very difficult to apply. So today we're going to talk all about the idea of parallel parenting and how this actually works in a real life situation. My guest today is Nicole Sodoma. She is an amazing attorney, practicing in North and South Carolina. She is a nationally recognized author, thought leader, and attorney redefining divorce, co-parenting, and modern family dynamics. I'm going to let Nicole tell you all about herself here in a minute, but I want to welcome you to this episode of Spotlight on the Divorce Expert. And Nicole, welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm like, who are you talking about? You make me sound so amazing. Thank you.
Well, you are amazing. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and because we talked about some ideas for this, and this whole idea of parallel parenting came up because it's something people hear about and don't necessarily understand, but you know a lot about this.
I think people hear the word parallel parenting, and if you've done your research, you might actually think it means disconnected. And I can tell you in my own separation and divorce, when we moved from the idea of co-parenting, which I thought was a possibility, to the idea of parallel parenting, I too felt like this was a failure almost, and wasn't sure how to apply it in real time. And that's, I'm going to go backwards for a minute. I'm 25 years of being a family law attorney. I'm certified collaborative. I've been a parenting coordinator since 2005 or 6. Family law is, what I do every single day, and I opened a law firm 18 years ago, and it's what we're known for across North and South Carolina. So I am engaged in this area of the law and the conflict that results in parenting plans and what works and what doesn't in pretty much all facets of my life. So to actually apply it, it's actually a lot of the reason why I wrote the book, because there are all these things that my clients weren't telling me, and there are all these things that once I was separated and divorced and experiencing co-parenting and parallel parenting and high conflict, I realized that there were all these things I probably would have been telling my clients. Parallel parenting is one of those things.
Right. And I love this. I also did my co-parenting at that time, facilitation training, coordination, training with Anne-Marie Termini and that organization many, many years ago. I don't do it anymore now, but it certainly does help prepare people when they kind of have these ideas that you don't have to be happy families and do this whole kumbaya co-parenting. If you can do it, fantastic.
Yes,
but you can want that if the other party, if the other spouse or the other parent does not want to do that, you can't force them to be a cooperative, collaborative co-parent.
100% agree. You cannot. That is not a choice that you get to make. How you show up is the choice you get to make. And if it doesn't work, you have to prioritize I always say, love your children more than you hate your spouse, but you can't, your ex-spouse, but you can't control, or your ex-parent, but you can't control how they feel about you. Their process, their grieving process, their communication process, who they are as a human isn't going to get any easier after you're no longer with them.
Yes.
And I think people think oh, well, at least I won't live with this person anymore. Yes, but you're still going to be communicating, and you're still going to have to meet them where they are in that communication style. And if it is a toxic relationship, then you have to figure out where that alignment's going to be so that you can keep your kids front and center.
Yes, yes. So let me ask you this question. How would you define parallel parenting?
Well, I think it's easier to think of parallel parenting with an analogy. Like, you can think of a railroad tracks heading in the same direction. You can think of, I've read people describe it as you're running a marathon, you're running beside someone and you're handing the baton back and forth. I remember when I first learned about it, it was traveling down a highway going in the same direction. So it's not going to be consistent, constant communication. It's going to be more businesslike. It's going to be more direct. Shorter is usually better. It's going to be, more fact-based, less opinion-based. There's not going to be as much opportunity for engagement in parallel parenting as you might once have experienced in your traditional roles when you were intact. And it might not be what you want. And
Right.
it might, but what ultimately the goal is to reduce conflict and to keep your children front and center. And so
Yeah.
parallel parenting is a way in which we can do that.
And sometimes, so I'm just going to put this out there, and you may not agree, so feel free to tell me I'm full of it. I'm comfortable with that. People can sometimes, and I love that you mentioned this, where people are in the grieving process and dealing with the whole divorce, because people can go through stages of life or phases of life where they just have bad behavior because they're not handling things well. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a toxic person, or that they have, these personality traits that are going to carry on. And I have seen situations where the divorce has brought out the worst, sometimes in both people going through the divorce, and they parallel parent for a while. And then once the grieving drops off, the stress and thing, they move more towards more of a traditional co-parenting arrangement. So this can be a stopgap, or it can be the way it's going to be. And I love the fact that you said it is not a failure. It's simply a different way to approach this very important aspect of continuing to be a parent to your child.
I think one of the misconceptions about separation is that you are going to meet in this same place. So, like, I think of the stopgap of the idea of nesting. So, nesting works great on a temporary basis if you can afford it, if it works, if there's no conflict, if there's no domestic violence, if there's no abuse, if there's no third party. Like, it works. It's a great stopgap. It's not for everybody, but it's not permanent, right? So the next step in that is creating a parenting schedule. That could very well be how parallel parenting works. I love that you mentioned that, because you would hope that, or at least I know hope's not a strategy, but you would hope that at some point that grieving process, the trust, whatever that is for you, if they're, someone's receiving counseling or they're in the middle of some other crisis, that, the stopgap will end and you will move towards co-parenting. Because the reality is, if you don't, you're likely, don't expect to sit with your ex at the wedding. Don't expect to sit with your ex at the soccer game or at graduation. Like, those things aren't going to happen. And it's actually one of my, I talk about this piece a lot because I always thought it was so important that your kids be able to see you together. You don't have to be great spouses to be great parents. And so seeing them together, seeing parents together in the stands or at the table or whatever, seemed to me to be something really positive and something I wanted to encourage. But it's not always that way for your children.
Right.
And, one of the things that I think about is, your children didn't experience the divorce the same way you experienced it. They didn't experience the marriage the same way you experienced it. They're thinking forward, not thinking about why your marriage failed.
Right.
And so, or why their family isn't the way it is. What they want to know is just move us forward. And it might actually be easier on them if you are parallel parenting. If they recognize that it causes one parent more stress, frustration, conflict, tension, anxiety, and that impacts how that parent shows up for them as the child, they might actually want parallel parenting. And they don't know what to call it maybe, but it is something that I think some parents have a hard time understanding. I raise my hand, like, I'm not perfect. I definitely experienced this and can attest to, that is a real thing.
Yes. And I think one of the things that I really like is the the technology that's available now, whether it's, and again, I don't endorse any particular platform, but I've had Our Family Wizard come and talk. I've had Best Interest come on and talk.
Yes.
Saul, who's created that whole new program specifically for high conflict. So there is this technology that can facilitate that railroad track parallel highway on the highway of life metaphor, whatever you want to use, where you can have the necessary communication, again, without having to meet at the local Dunkin' Donuts every Sunday and have coffee. It doesn't have to look like that. It can look like whatever you want it to look like. As an attorney, Nicole, how do you think this alters how you might want to set up your co-parenting plan or your parenting plan when you're in mediation or when you're talking to your attorney, if you know that you're going to be in a parallel parenting phase, either temporarily or long term?
It's a great opportunity to create boundaries at that place. You always can agree outside of your agreement, so long as you both do. You always can agree outside of your order or your parenting plan, so long as you both agree. But having that backup plan, having those boundaries in your agreement is really important. An example is, maybe you have one email at the end of an exchange or a transition and another one at the other end. So if you're a week on, week off, maybe it's a Monday email by one parent. If there is a requirement for a response, you respond within a certain amount of time. And then the next parent at the next transition tells about the prior week. That's a good example. Parallel parenting might be, usually there's one parent who sort of spoon feeds the other on calendar, right? So it's deadlines for school or doctor's appointments and well checks and things like that. Identifying who that person's going to be, maybe. Having a shared calendar. It doesn't even have to be through one of those apps. It could be simply, what about, and I've been saying this for intact families and not intact families, and I've had mine for decades, more than a decade, a joint email account where you use the shared calendar. There's inside your agreement, it's neither one of us change the password, and if we do, we immediately notify the other. But you can update the calendar instead of having to send an email that says, hey, by the way, the doctor's appointment is on Tuesday. Just wanted to make sure that you still have it on your calendar. No, it is no longer spoon feeding. There's a calendar, it's a joint calendar, and it's available to both of you. Also, using that same email address to communicate with coaches, teachers, physicians, all the apps that for medical appointments, that reduces conflict. Have someone set up that email account and you both have access to it. And so those are some really simple boundaries that you can put in place from a communication perspective inside your document.
Yeah.
Another little nuance that I think of is, if you don't want to be really careful in the wording of that document. For example, mother shall pick up children at transition point or school on Thursdays when school recesses. Okay, what did I specifically say? I said mother shall. Does that mean that if mother's tied up at work and sends a friend or carpools, maybe not. That might be prohibited because it said mother shall. So maybe the word you're looking for is shall be responsible for. So there, really, if you've got somebody who's high conflict and you feel like you are going to have to follow the order until that conflict wanes, then think about the words, think about the unintended consequences of the way you describe something.
Yeah. That is, and I'm gonna throw this in here too. Do not use boilerplate co-parenting agreements because they do not address these. They do not address this.
No two families are alike. Do not assume that any boilerplate, anything you get on the internet, whatever your neighbor did, I mean, you can use it for ideas. You can ask chat, what's a great parenting schedule based on the attachment theory or based on these routines that my kids have or whatever, my work schedule. But really do not rely on the language that you find on the internet or boilerplate.
Right. And it really scares me when I have my clients come to me and say, oh, yeah, we finished our co-parenting plan. It's 3 pages. I'm thinking, oh my God, there is a huge, like, you need to, the higher or the more difficult the other person is, the more specific you have to be, because they're going to spend hours perusing that document to find that exact word that is a loophole, that creates a loophole, or this clause now is in contrast to this clause, and therefore I'm doing my own thing. And you've got to spend the detail. Yeah, yeah,
Cherry
yeah.
picking the order to their benefit is enough to drive me crazy. So yeah, like that's the example of shall and shall be responsible. Two very, very different statements. So, really, and that the internet isn't probably going to tell you that when you look for a provision. So, but, on the other hand, it's the advice I want my clients to be thinking, like to be receiving and contemplating is, my job is not just right now. I want you to be thinking about a year from now or 3 years from now, what if you were in a blended family? Statistics are that you probably will be. And so you are probably going to marry again, and there might be children. And so what is the method of modification? How do you do that? What time does somebody need to request it? How far in advance? Because depending on where you are in the court system and your jurisdiction, if you filed a request to modify right now, you might not get heard for a year from now.
Right.
And that's something really to consider depending on your jurisdiction if you're not thinking forward.
Right. And I think the other thing that you brought up that's really important is if you can build into the agreement even that before anybody does any litigation stuff on the co-parenting, that there's an attempt to return to mediation and see if you can't knock out a new agreement or address those issues within mediation, which can save you a bunch of money and time and hopefully get everybody on that same page. I wanted to ask you one question, Nicole. How do you recommend that people handle? I've seen this so many times in agreements where it'll say, if mother can't pick up the child, like the whole right of first refusal, which I think is a horrible thing to call this when you're talking to kids. But basically it says that if you can't take care of your kids, the other parent for X amount of time, the other parent has the opportunity to take the kids for that amount of time. When you're doing parallel parenting, that becomes more complicated, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, I've yet to meet a judge who actually likes a right of first refusal because it is additional transitions. And so, and it requires additional communication. So within timeframes. So first you have to define how long are you going to be gone before this provision is triggered. Is it 3 hours? Is it 6 hours? Or is it overnight? And how long do they have to respond if you want to exercise it before you call a friend, a child care provider, or before a partner, a new partner, or a grandparent, how long do you have to wait? And especially when you have two working parents and one of them travels, like it can really be a lot of back and forth.
Right.
And what happens is that other parent becomes the babysitter.
Sure.
So, and then that makes for a lot of frustration. So there are lots of things to consider if you are thinking about a right of first refusal. If my clients, or if it is absolutely something that we cannot avoid, I typically go for if you're going to be gone overnight. And I like to accept out family or spouses or anyone that is in the children's lives.
Right.
But you can't predict that, right? So you can't predict a new partner or a new spouse. So it can be really complicated and lots of things to think about before you include it in the document.
And I've seen the other thing I've seen people put in there is that both parents have to agree on who a third party can be to take care of the kids, whether it's daycare, babysitting, even a grandparent. Like these guys, don't put that kind of language in if you're dealing with a high conflict person, because they're just going to say no to everything. And then they get the kids because that whole right of first refusal kicks in if it's in there. So,
That is really a controlling tactic,
yes,
and it can be manipulated. And so you have to think through some of those, like having a shared list. And also, like, again, we're not talking about just the here and now. They might be toddlers now, but
right,
how do we know who those people are going to be, 3 years from now? And,
right.
that experience is going to be different for the children, for you. That doesn't allow for the idea of you evolving as a human, as a parent, for the children growing. I mean, it really has a lot of limitations.
Yes. So this is why I think this idea of parallel parenting is so important, because it does offer that protection or that
Yes.
reduction in the amount of time that you have to spend in the communication part of a difficult relationship post divorce. But it can also be very, very specific so that it really does protect the kids, save them a whole bunch of additional transitions. And I love the idea of looking forward, because even in these high conflict cases, quite often there's the whole thing of how old do the kids have to be before they can stay by themselves? And then how long can they stay by
Good
themselves?
one.
There's nothing in the law that says a 12-year-old can stay alone for an hour, but if it's 2 hours, then CPS can get involved. That doesn't exist. And for some reason, people have it in their head that those kind of things are out there, and they're really not. So what do you recommend for something like that? Or do you even put
Don't
those
you
in
love
your
it?
plan?
Well, I mean, you're going to rely on the law. So what, that's like, I think about when can your child sit in the front seat? Right? Like I think that is probably state specific, but has to do with height and weight.
Right.
And it's really not age, because it's where the seatbelt hits, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, it can be really overly complicated, but having a deal breaker, like having a tiebreaker, is, I think, often really helpful. So if it's going to be a medical issue, if it's going to be an academic issue, think about the people that you could appoint them to help when there is a tie or a disagreement
Right.
on one of those issues.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, if the law is not there as a backup, and I'm thinking about like the seatbelt issue with the front seat, or staying at home, looking at those as a guide rather, if it's not in your order. And, sometimes there's this weird balance that you have to find in your order with those specifics. You are, like, I'd say, like, show yourself some grace and compassion, show your counsel and parenting coordinator and mediator some grace and compassion, because you are never going to solve every problem that comes up. I promise you, you will never, ever, always, you will never solve it. And I don't say never and always often. So, but that is one. You are always going to have a gap in that order that you didn't predict, despite all the hands and eyes that touched it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Good piece of advice. Nicole, and I'm sure we could talk about this for a much longer period of time. These are always so short. What's the one piece of wisdom or advice or just insight you'd like to share that you think people that are dealing with these kind of co-parenting arrangements might want to consider moving forward?
one, I'm going to borrow from one of my colleagues, and because she taught it to me, she said, always delete the last sentence of your email. You don't need it. When you're in and just try that. It's really hysterical that most of the time that's correct. I think that's really funny, and often true when you're in a high conflict situation. My takeaway whenever we're discussing high conflict and parenting plans is all about communication. And unless it's urgent, it doesn't require an immediate response. And so I want you to think about that idea of stimulus and response, and really using that time in the middle wisely, so that you can get a clear head, so that you can look at the question or the scenario from 50,000 feet. So build in that time before you respond so that you respond with the children's best interest in mind, with all the things considered. And because I think a lot of times when you're in that space, it's really easy to respond with the assumption that someone is not being trustworthy, that someone is not being honest or acting in good faith. And so I hope and I want people to recognize that space will help them get to the better answer.
Absolutely. Thank you for that really excellent reminder. If people want to find out more about what you do or reach out and work with you, if they're in your area, your jurisdiction, what's the best way to do that, Nicole?
I am on all the social platforms. It's Nicole Sodoma, and Sodoma is Sodoma. And I think at this juncture in my career, I would bet that if you typed in Nicole Divorce Attorney, you'd find me somewhere online. But we are in North Carolina and South Carolina, and happy to help. I try to keep my Instagram reels fresh with content that we don't talk about often. So would love the engagement, would love the questions, and just spend my days hopefully leaving people better than I found them.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nicole. This has been a really great conversation and a really good reminder about the benefits of parallel parenting and how it can be used very positively to protect your kids and protect your own sanity through divorce and post-divorce. So thanks so much for being here, Nicole.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Spotlight on the Divorce Expert. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.